What's going on, everybody? My name is Tenebrous Infinite, and I've got a quick video here talking about how traps could potentially be improved in the future here in Generation Zero. So, we're coming up to the absolute end of my 30 days of traps. I've done 30 traps in total here, and we're ending off on another kind of information segment. So we're going to talk about ways that I think traps could be improved in the future here, and just a couple little ideas that I'm gonna kind of throw the way of the developers here of Generation Zero. Uh, these are not priority changes at all, and admittedly, if we don't see anything of this implemented into the game, it's absolutely no harm done, because traps, as I've stated numerous times throughout this series, are more of a novelty here in Generation Zero than anything. But I've got 4 big ideas that I think could greatly overall improve traps. This isn't going to be a wish list video either, so if you guys would like to see a video from me talking about different ideas for trap materials that we could see in the future, let me know down in the comments below. But let's just get into my idea number 1 here for how traps could be improved. So the first idea that I have for how traps could be improved is an improvement on how we locate the traps that we set in the world. So I'm going to show some footage here of what it looks like when you look through the tech view on your binoculars. You'll notice that there's a blue outline around the armor pieces. They're actually highlighted completely in blue. I think that it would be very useful for trap materials if you were to add that blue outline to the materials we place in the world. Right now, with the way it works in Generation Zero, traps don't render very far, and I think that that could be circumvented with the blue outline. That way we could keep traps rendering at a minimal distance, further reducing any sort of load that it would take on the CPU or any sort of intensiveness that it would take on the game itself. But with the blue outline, it would be a lot easier to locate the traps that you've placed, whether or not you've placed them in the high grass, or if you've moved back outside of the render distance, if that blue outline could potentially actually render much further, so that way you could place traps at a larger distance and be able to keep track of where you've placed them and how you've placed them. So for my second idea for traps is adding a little bit more informational subtext to traps themselves and trap materials themselves. Right now, trap materials will tell you the basic gist of what the material will do, but I think that it would be awesome for us as players to have information on how large the blast radius is for EMPs and explosives, and when it comes to explosives, having some information based on how powerful the explosive is. I think that the radius could be measured in meters, and the power could be given an arbitrary number of 1 all the way up to 5 potentially, or wherever the developers see fit for having a max number for how powerful the explosive is. This would really help for being able to know whether or not a trap will be effective in a certain situation or for a certain enemy in the game. So I think that the small fuel cells and grenades could have one of the lowest counts, whereas the large fuel cells could have the highest count. And so I think that that would greatly improve the utility of trap effects. And when it comes to EMPs, we could potentially get the blast radius of it, so that way you would be able to know how far that EMP will actually reach, coinciding with how far the explosive would actually reach when utilizing it as a trap material. Alright, so for idea number 3, this one is maybe a bit more controversial of an idea, but I think that it would greatly improve the utility of traps. And that's to have a multiplicative EMP effect that you could have in the game. So What I'm thinking is currently as it stands, EMPs will just power down an enemy for a set amount of time, and then you have to wait for the enemy to power back up before you're able to EMP them again. I would like to see a change come to EMPs, in which case you could hit an enemy with more than one EMP to get a further downed time effect. Meaning that if you were using, say, the small EMPs and you threw one of them, it would down the enemy for a minimal amount of time. But then if you were to throw an entire stack of 5 at an enemy, you would get the enemy downed for a much longer period of time. Same with the medium EMPs having a kind of medium downtime effect, and then if you were to throw again, say, a full stack of 2 at them, you would get a large amount of time to down an enemy. And then when looking at something like the EMP cells or the car batteries, if you were to set up like 5 or 6 of them in an area, trigger all of them at the same time, you would get an enemy to be downed for a very long period of time. I think that this would greatly improve and add utility to the EMP materials in this game. And also, even though it could potentially take out some of the challenge of combat when you utilize these materials, the idea around it that would be the kind of limitation to it would be how many EMPs you can carry in your inventory at a time, and also the fact that we have to spend time farming these materials and gathering these materials. So giving them the ability to have a further greater effect in game would only benefit the materials and would only benefit EMPs overall, I think. And for the last idea I have here on how you could improve trap materials in the game, I think that large fuel cells should be given a buff. After the explosive nerf from months back, most explosive materials in this game don't do very much damage at all. When it comes to the prototype tanks, the military tanks, and the Phoenix tanks, I have tested large fuel cells against all of them. It does 12% damage to the prototype tanks, 7% damage to the military tanks, and only 6% damage to the Phoenix tanks, requiring a lot of large fuel cells to take down a single tank. I think that large fuel cells are the kind of material where, again, it takes quite a while to farm up a decent supply of them, and once you've farmed that up, you only get one use out of that material, and then it's gone, and you'll need to farm up more again. So I think that it would be awesome to see large fuel cells in specific get a much larger damage boost to them. I think that it would be great to see something like only 5 for a prototype tank, 6 for a military tank, and then 7 for a Phoenix tank. That way you would need to kill, in retrospect, something like 7 tanks and get large fuel cells off all of those 7 Phoenix tanks in order to get kind of like, quote-unquote, a freebie. When you look at lotteries and stuff like that, a lot of times if you have a certain amount of tickets or something like that, you'll be able to get a free ticket or a free scratch. And I think that it would be awesome to see that kind of mentality come towards large fuel cells in the game. If you were to go off and farm up a whole bunch of large fuel cells, then you could actually utilize those to kill an extra tank and get a kind of quote-unquote freebie out of your hard effort of farming and gathering supplies. I also think that this would greatly improve traps overall, because then you could set up effective traps for harvesters and tanks in the game, because currently, as far as it stands, there's no way to efficiently trap these enemies and actually deal with them with an individual trap. So those are my ideas for how you could actually improve the traps in the game, and just some ideas to throw the way of the developers. Whether or not they would like to utilize these ideas is entirely up to them, and whether or not these ideas are possible is, again, entirely up to them, because I'm not a developer in any way, and I don't know how hard it would be to actually implement these sort of features. But just from my experience and during the past 30 days of traps, I think that it would greatly improve the game to see traps be able to serve a much larger utility through the EMPs, and a much more damaging explosive utility through a bit of a damage buff to at least just the large fuel cells. So I'd like to know what you guys think about my ideas here for how traps could be improved, and I would definitely love to hear your guys' ideas on how traps could be improved in the comments below. But for now, I've been Tenebris, you've been awesome, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Until then, peace.